Well, we are live on YouTube Live. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to turn over the introduction and before session notes to Sarah Gott-Wallace, one of our co-chairs of the Dr. Talbot Spivak Holocaust Memorial Week Committee.
Thank you so much, Steve. And thank you so far to everyone who's joined us. I know that we're going to have more people joining us as the session continues. Just a couple of things I wanted to note before I actually introduce Carla. Due to the storm, of course, we might experience some technical difficulty, but just stick with us and hopefully we'll be able to come back on. And also keep in mind that these sessions today and tomorrow are being recorded, so you can go back and watch it. And please share it with your friends and family as well. This is vital and important to all of us who are involved in Holocaust education, myself included. I teach history at FSW with Holocaust as my focus. So it's very important to us that you share as many Holocaust survivor stories as possible, because no matter how many stories you hear, it's going to be our job going into the future to carry on the torch and the beacon of truth for these amazing, brave, strong people who come to us. They share their story. They share some of the most difficult, intimate details of their life. And all that they ask in return is that we continue to keep the story alive, that we continue to keep the truth alive and share their stories. And now when we face so many stories of Holocaust deniers and anti-Semitism, it's never been so important as it is now to hear survivor stories and share those. So without further ado, we have with us today Mrs. Carla Benninga, and she's going to be sharing her story of what it was like to be a young lady growing up in Holland, in the Netherlands, during the Holocaust. So without me taking up any more of your time, Carla, you can start sharing your story anytime you'd like. Thank you so much in advance. And we're going to hold all questions till the end. But as you are listening to Carla, if you would like, in the chat, please post your questions and we will hold questions at the end. So thank you, Carla. Please go on and share your story whenever you would like.
Okay. Before I start my talk, I want to show you this book. This book contains over 110,000 names of people that were murdered in the Holocaust. Before the war, there were about 140,000 Jews, and out of those, only 30,000 survived. It states the names where they were born and which camp they were killed. The Germans kept meticulous records. All right, here we go. My talk is called Adolescent Lost, because when the war started, in 1940, I was 12, and when it was over, I was 17. World War II for the Netherlands began on May 10, 1940, and ended on May 1945, when the German occupational forces surrendered and beat their retreat to the Heimat. That day, May 5th, was an unforgettable day. For the people in Holland, the war and the occupation lasted 5 years. In the ongoing sweep of history, 5 years is not such a long time, but for those who had felt in their bodies and souls the oppression, suffering, brutality, hunger, and death, these were very long years. Worst off were the Jews. Few survived. Most perished by Hitler's death camps. The word Holocaust will forever be colored by the horrible fate that struck them. We cannot comprehend this monstrous rape on a segment of the human race. Germany's capitulation in 1945 formally marked the end of the war that engulfed virtually all of Europe. The armistice was so much more. It sealed the fate of Nazism, a demonic system that was fueled by the belief in the superiority of the so-called Aryan race. The world remains horror-struck at the forces of evil that lashed the world and tore it apart, wiping out millions of lives. With a measure of incredulity, we asked, how a civilized nation, a nation that gave us Martin Luther and that produced great musicians such as Bach, Beethoven, Handel, and Brahms, could sink to such depths of depravity. How did it start? May 10th, 1940, was a Friday morning I will never forget. It was 4 a.m. when my sister, who hopefully is listening in Boulder, and I were awakened by shooting resulting in a plane crash less than half a mile from our home. It was the beginning of the invasion of Holland. Death was everywhere, around every corner, in every street. Death came as a German soldier. He left behind a swastika for every grave. A ranting and raving Führer convulsed the world with death. Unprepared, Dutch soldiers fought with weapons dating back to World War I. Defense ended in death. The war lasted 5 days. We were living in The Hague, and at that time, I was a 12-year-old 7th grader. My sister was 10. We could not believe that anyone could bother our peaceful small country, but we were important because of our long coastline, the access to Great Britain. We spent 5 days during which there actually was little fighting, playing Monopoly with other friends, a game I have seldom played since. On the 5th day, even playing Monopoly abruptly ended. Sometime that afternoon, Rotterdam, only 20 miles from where we lived, was bombed. We sat in our basement for what seemed like an eternity, and when it stopped, we knew that the war was over. Little did we know that it had only just begun. That evening, the 4 of us, along with some very close friends, drove to IJmuiden, a harbor town on the North Sea. My parents, fearing what was coming, decided that we had to leave the country. I can still hear my mother tell our housekeeper where she could reach us in England after the war. We went in our friend's car. However, he was so shaking that he could not drive. My father, who had had a terrible automobile accident in 1933 and who had not driven since, took over. How we arrived in IJmuiden, I will never know. Barricades were everywhere. We got there, the town was aflame. This was the city with hundreds of oil tanks which were all set afire. We found ourselves at the docks with thousands of other persons, mostly Jewish, all trying to leave the country. It became soon apparent that this would be impossible. There was one small boat with standing room only, which was still leaving. The last ones had sailed that afternoon. My parents decided that the small boat would be suicide. We later found out that it hit a mine less than a mile from shore. We drove home in complete silence, knowing and fearing the worst. Everywhere in conquered Europe, German occupation forces vigorously implemented Hitler's racial policies. For the Jewish question, as he called it, Hitler adopted the final solution, extermination. To deal with the Jews of occupied Europe, the Germans created an efficient apparatus that rounded up Jews and transported them to special extermination camps, many of them in Poland. There the prisoners were worked to exhaustion before being shot or gassed. To Treblinka, Bergen-Belsen, Sobibor, Dachau, but especially to Auschwitz, the long, slow trains began to move in 1942, carrying their wretched human freight to destruction. Before the nightmare had passed, an estimated 6 million Jews had been systematically murdered. In Amsterdam, the crowds line up every day on the brick pavement in front of the house at number 263 Prinsengracht. They appear to be mostly tourists, laughing and chatting happily in a variety of languages. Once they are inside the building, their mood changes. There's nothing happy or funny about genocide. They look at the hinged bookcase that once concealed a haven for a group of Jews hiding from the Nazis. They climb the narrow wooden steps behind the bookcase, steps that must have echoed thunderously with the pounding of hobnailed boots the day the stormtroopers arrived. They whisper to each other as they inspect the cramped quarters where 8 people hid for 25 months before being discovered and hauled off to concentration camps. And they watch silently the slides made from a last Nazi film showing a roundup of Jews and a train ride to the gas ovens. The Anne Frank House attracts thousands of visitors a year, drawn here by a young girl's account of life in hiding. As a little aside, my sister was at the Jewish school. They were the same age for a short while. The Anne Frank House attracts thousands of visitors. I was more fortunate than Anne. I survived the Holocaust. My story began much the same way as Anne's. After the 5-day war ended, our lives did not change immediately. After the 5-day war ended, our lives did not change immediately. At that time, only German soldiers occupied Holland. We were allowed to return to school, resume a fairly normal life. I finished the 7th and 8th grade at our regular school, but we knew that this situation was soon to change. We were hoping that the war would not last too long and that our lives would not be endangered as much as my parents and their peers expected. This was not to be. In 1941, the edicts began. Jews must wear a yellow star. Jews must hand in their bicycles and radios. Jews are only allowed to do their shopping between 3 and 5 o'clock, and then only in shops which bear the sign Jewish shop. Jews are banned from trains and all public transportation and are forbidden to drive. Jews must be indoors by 8 o'clock and cannot even sit in their own backyard after that hour. Jews may not take part in public sports. Jews may not visit non-Jews. Jewish children may not attend public or private schools. I was very sad that I could no longer go to school with my friends or even visit them. I was the only Jewish student in my class. I began the 9th grade in a special school where all of the teachers and students were Jewish. Many of the teachers were college professors not allowed to teach at the university any longer. The process was far above the norm and the curriculum was quite strenuous. So strenuous, in fact, that half of my class was not promoted to the 10th grade. My sister and I had to walk to school each morning, an hour's walk. Our books were very heavy to carry, so my father arranged for one of his employees, a Gentile, to deliver the books to the school and pick them up in the afternoon. The beginning of 1942 school year saw our school population diminish by the day. It was about that time that the so-called voluntary transportation began. Jews were promised a work camp situation in Germany where they would be well treated. They went, mostly poorer Jews, lambs led to slaughter. Also, the actual razzias, the roundups, were beginning. Each day, another student failed to show in class. In November 42, all Jews residing in Holland had to move to Amsterdam. The Germans arrived at our house in The Hague and told us to leave all furniture except for our beds. We were allowed to keep our clothes and personal belongings. My parents wisely had already stored our silver and artwork at the home of a Gentile friend. At that time, too, a verwalter, a so-called caretaker, had taken over my father's business since he was considered incapable of running business he had been running for years. Ironically, our house was later bombed by the British Air Force, who had mistaken that area for military headquarters. We moved into a small apartment in Amsterdam, sharing it with a cousin of my father's and his wife. Again, we had to find a Jewish school, this time an even farther walk, and no one to carry our books. Extracurricular activities did not exist, but we got our exercise walking. I often went to see my grandmother, who was in poor health, was living with my aunt and uncle and their 3 children in Amsterdam as well. By the spring of 1943, all Jews remaining in Amsterdam, many had already gone into hiding or had been taken to the concentration camps, had to move into a ghetto within the city. Our new apartment was in labor-type housing on the 3rd floor. There were no washing facilities except for the kitchen sink, no hot water, no refrigerator. My father built a washstand as well as a wooden box outside a window to keep our perishables. We had to use the public bathhouse for Jews only, of course, to take our shower. One learns to do without. But we were still together. German SS made their weekly roundups, ringing all doorbells, to find out which apartment housed Jewish families and which of those families were on the exempt list. Because my father worked in a Jewish grocery store, we were still on that list. One night, our doorbell rang. They were there. Our luck held. We were still looking for non-exempt Jews. Our neighbors across the hall were rounded up that night. The next day, we got word that my grandmother, my aunt and uncle, and my 3 cousins were rounded up. My grandmother, too ill to walk, was hauled off in the grocery cart. They were transported to Westerbork, a Dutch concentration camp, which served as a transit camp to the camps in Germany and Poland. They were transported to Auschwitz almost immediately. 2 of my cousins, both girls, miraculously survived. They knew that their parents and little brother arrived at Auschwitz at a time that there was no gas. This is an unconfirmed report, and were burned alive. Another sister of my father and her husband were also arrested about the same time, and they died in Sobibor. My mother's parents could not face deportation. My grandfather, who had started as a delivery boy, had built up a large corporation. When they took this away from him, he became very depressed, also because he was losing his eyesight at the time. They always told us that if told to leave their home, they would have to be carried out. One night before we moved to Amsterdam, they turned on the gas in the kitchen, where their faithful housekeeper found them the next morning, still holding hands. We at least know where they are buried and can visit their graves. The Germans, angry that they escaped them, poured gasoline on their house and burned it to the ground. There's another house now. I put the first pole in the ground after the war, but I have no feeling for it. But I still have beautiful memories of good times spent in the home of my wonderful grandparents during the first 12 years of my life. The weekly roundups continued. I still experience that feeling of fear whenever I hear a doorbell or phone ring in the middle of the night. It had become apparent that our exempt status would not be best for our family. It was time to split up, since chances of being greater or larger group hit together, we would not know where the others were hiding. My sister and I were aided by the college student underground organization, which was part of a larger underground network. During the last few weeks before we went into hiding, we dropped off a few items, such as clothing, a few books, some cherished objects, but no photographs, at a safe house until we had everything that we would need. It would have looked conspicuous to carry a suitcase wearing the yellow star. The day we had all been dreading had finally arrived. We sat around our dining room table, the only room in our little flat that would hold all 4 of us, and found we could not speak. What went through our mind? Would we ever see each other again? Where were we going? How would we cope by ourselves without our parents? I was 15, my sister almost 14. How my parents must have suffered. I was picked up first. My parents left next, leaving my sister, whose underground worker had not yet arrived. The fears my parents must have had leaving her by herself defy description. She was picked up less than an hour later. She can tell you about that herself. My underground worker, whose name I never discovered, took me to the safe house to pick up my belongings after I had torn off that horrible yellow star, hoping I would never have to wear it again. We went by train to a home of a Catholic family in the south of Holland. I was sure I would be spotted immediately and hauled off to a camp, but my fear was unfounded. I stayed with this family on and off during most of my hiding years. I went into hiding in May 1943. The American Army liberated us in September 1944. The underground network also had a courier system whereby we could keep in touch with our families and would bring our food rationing coupons. There was danger in this also, as we never had the same contact twice, and you never know whom you could trust. My story is not unique. Thousands of Jews throughout Holland were hidden by people who could not and did not believe in atrocities perpetuated by the Germans. My story is just one of many. At my hiding place, I was introduced as a visiting cousin whose mother was ill. I could therefore not attend school. However, I did study from the daughter's books and later took some private lessons from some understanding nuns. Somehow, how I managed to obtain the necessary high school books and keep up with the curriculum was awarded my high school diploma after the war without having to go back to school. This diploma was recognized by the University of Amsterdam, which I later attended. The family with whom I was hiding had a son, Jan, in a work camp in Germany. When he escaped and joined the underground, the Germans came looking for him. It became too hot for me, so I left, although I periodically returned. I went from house to house. Sometimes I rode my bike in broad daylight. I had false identification papers, and at other times I had to sneak out in the middle of the night. I was always one step ahead of the Germans. In the 16 months that I was hiding, I stayed in a dozen different places. One home in which I stayed had a family with 7 sons. They were hiding 3 other Jewish girls. When the family started to inquire about my parents' finances to see if I would make a suitable wife for one of their sons and encouraged them to make passes, I decided it was time to move again. One time I stayed in a row house with school teachers. During that time, when they were working, I could not move, not flush the toilet, etc. I spent my days reading and studying. When I could no longer stand this pressure, my underground contact found me another place to stay. I was barely 16 at that time, but I was constantly making adult decisions. My sister and I went into this war as children and came out as adults, a fact that my parents found difficult to deal with after the war. We never were teenagers. This was adolescence lost. The area where I was hiding was a coal mining community. And the various family that I lived with were simple people and not well off. Bathroom were an unknown luxury, and the fact that I washed and bathed myself every day was something that never counted. It was strictly wash on Monday, iron on Tuesday, keep on the same underwear all week. I contributed to the household by cleaning, washing, ironing, and darning what must have been thousands of black socks. That's another thing I'll never do again. Food was not plentiful during this time, but I did not starve. My diet consisted mainly of bread and potatoes, and I became quite overweight. Many fared far worse, eating tulips, soup, tulip bread, and even plain tulip bulbs. Many people during the last winter of the war in 1945 actually starved to death, mostly the poor ones who could not afford black market prices. In spite of all the misery, fear, and pain, a sense of humor had to be maintained. There were even parties given by the underground, but they were few and far between. In many ways, I was lucky. All the families that hit me out did so out of charity and love. Many others, however, as in the case of my husband's family, demanded huge sums of money. There was always this threat that you would be turned in if the money ran out or if they wanted more than you could afford. One difficulty I experienced was the fact that I could not talk to my parents. As a person going into adulthood, I had many questions, including those about sex, and I had no one to talk to. So I would send a letter to my mother via the underground courier and wait sometimes for months for her reply. Although all of these problems seem minor compared to all the horrors we experienced at the time, it was very difficult. My first period, although informed and expecting it, came during my years in hiding. No one to share it with, no one who understood my feelings. A month before our liberation, the Germans came looking for Jan again. I was not there at the time because of his involvement in the underground. Since they could not find him, they took his father instead and executed him a week before liberation. His mother, a kind but fairly ignorant woman, to her dying days accused her son of killing his father. Jan lived with his guilt for the rest of his life. He died in 1985 in a mental hospital. The area where I was hiding is in the southern part of Holland. We were liberated by the American Army in September 1944. I cannot describe the feeling when we saw the Germans retreat. No one dared go outside for fear of being shot. 2 hours after the Germans left, the American troops arrived. To be free again, we did not think it would ever happen. We walked and walked so much that I hurt, not having been outside for months. An American soldier gave me a K ration, and I, thinking it was a chocolate bar, ate the whole thing. I was sick for 2 days. I once got angry at a soldier for throwing out bacon drippings. It was also the first time that I ran into discrimination. I was talking to a Black American soldier when a white officer motioned me aside. He said he warned me not to talk to Black soldiers. That actually wasn't the word he said. When I told him that I had been liberated by the American Army and that I loved all Americans, did not care what color they were, he shrugged. He said, "You better be careful." Now that I was free, I was really on my own. Although staying with the same family I have been hiding with, I did not know where my parents were, other than that they were hiding in The Hague, part of the country still occupied by the Germans. I knew that my sister was somewhere in the south too. It took me 2 months to find out where. With help, I got transportation to see her. The people she had hiding with also agreed to let her stay, and she had gone back to school. Since neither of us had any money, we had no other choice but to stay where we were until our parents would be free too. I had immediately taken a crash typing course and found a job with the American Intelligence Agency because I spoke English and could type. This way I was able to give some money to the family where I lived. I had no clothes that fit. My parents from time to time had sent us some, but all contact came to a halt that September of 1944. In February 1945, I got an invitation from my aunt and uncle, my mother's brother, who had survived the war in Brussels. However, their daughter and son-in-law were killed in one of the camps. I went to Brussels, they bought me clothes, and for the first time, I felt like a human being again. I met some young people I knew, and we actually enjoyed ourselves. During all this time, I still had no news of my parents. In the latter part of April 1945, 7 months after my liberation, I received a postcard from my parents brought to me by a former Dutch underground worker. The letter took 2 weeks to reach me since there was no regular mail service. The letter came from the Dutch concentration camp Westerbork, earlier mentioned as the transit camp. I did not know at the time what had happened to them, but they were alive. With help from the American intelligence service where I worked, who gave me some resemblance of an American uniform and some important papers, and Jan, we immediately set out by car to Westerbork. This trip of about 200 miles took us 4 days. Regular travel had been suspended since the war was not yet over. We had to go through Arnhem and Nijmegen where all the bridges were demolished. We had to wait for hours to cross all the rivers by ferry. I found my parents, who had been free for about 3 weeks, in the camp in relatively good health. They were not allowed to leave the camp until they had a place to stay or until the war was over. I cannot describe our feeling of joy at this reunion, knowing that all 4 of us had survived the Holocaust. So that's my story.
Thank you, Carla. That was a very wonderful story. In the chat, we have from Jan Bielkins, love you, Carla, Roos and Jan Bielkins. From Robin Cook, Carla is my hero. From our Benninga one, hello, Roos and Jan. Thanks for tuning in. And we have from Betty M. Sanibel, this is Janice. Carla is my hero too. And from Carol Hershey Periard, thank you. Certainly a moving story. And Sarah, if you wanted to add in anything.
It's just such a powerful, strong story, showing just how much strength you have. You're my hero too, Carla. If anybody has any questions, feel free to type those into the chat and we'll relay those to Carla as well. What did your father do, Carla, before the war?
He inherited a store where they sold furniture and clothes, shoes, on consignment. People paid a certain amount each month. He never liked it because there were cases he had to take the furniture back. But after the war, my grandfather, whom I mentioned, his son took over the shoe business and asked my father to be the vice president for sales, and we moved to Amsterdam, and he worked there for a long time after the war.
Thank you. So he was always in sales. Would you say that being a Jewish grocer at the grocery store probably really helped save you guys?
Sure. Can you talk a little shorter? I'm a little deaf.
Sure. Would you say that your your father working at the Jewish grocery store was one of the key elements to yours and your family's survival?
Yeah, he got this job, and then you got a stamp that you were exempt from deportation, which of course wasn't true. But after all the people were gone that didn't have this stamp, we knew it was our turn. Even the big Jewish, they had a board of about 6 people in Amsterdam who were found by the Germans, and even they had, had to go. So I don't know whether I forgot whether they survived or what happened to those people.
Wow. Does anyone have any other questions for Carla? A few more messages of thank you for sharing your story and your strength and courage, that your story is very impressive. You're getting a real fan club today, Carla.
I wonder if my sister wants to say anything. I don't know who's online. Budding?
Looks like there's an Benninga. We'll see if they come
Or
through.
my son, who I'm sure is on it.
Probably. You have 23 people watching you right now. Ashrith says, thank you. Very interesting story. Hi, Ashrith.
Uh-oh. I don't know how I can get the pictures of the people who are still in.
Are they in your photos on your iPad or your device?
Take video, photo, that's mine, I think. Uh-oh, no, I disappeared.
There's
No,
a little
not,
back button underneath the word on the top left that says camera, if you want to show your face again.
Well, I don't know. I probably have to go back out and in. Hold on a minute. I'll go right back.
Yeah, it's on the very, very top left. Underneath the word camera, there's a little arrow that points left that you can click, and that should bring back your face.
Yeah, on the left side underneath.
It says join a meeting, so why doesn't it go? No, I don't want.
Rob mentions that because they're not on the Zoom call, that they can't interact with you, except for, within the chat at the moment.
Yeah, I can do video conference and host. Can I click host or sign in? Host.
Well, I am the host. I can stop your screen share and you can try sharing your screen again if you'd like.
Yeah.
Okay, let me stop your screen real quick.
Okay. Should I click leave exit?
Well, that would leave the Zoom call entirely.
Okay.
But because we can hear you,
Yeah.
Anita says that she's listening in from Boulder, Colorado.
Yeah.
Carol asks, when did you come to the United States? And Rob answered 1950.
We got married in 1950 and we came in the summer of 51.
And when was your son born?
What's that?
When was your son born?
He's retired.
No, what year was your son born? Was he born here or was he born?
He was born in 1955.
Okay.
He's probably, I'm sure he's on unless he couldn't get on.
Yes,
he's on our live
Okay.
Zoom, or he's on the YouTube.
Okay. I think I'm okay. Okay, no. Oh, and now I see who's on. And now I see who's on.
We're getting a little bit of feedback from you, Carla, from looking at the YouTube stream.
Yeah, and the YouTube stream. Yeah, it says it says that. Oh, I didn't know that my sons. I didn't know that my sons.
Yeah. Your son wants us to explain to you that it's
yeah, I can hear and I can see who's on the chat.
Yeah.
My son says, I don't understand that it's a chat, not a Zoom. I don't know.
You've lived through all these things, and now we expect you to know the difference between chat and Zooms and all this stuff, right? This is just a lot.
Yeah.
This new era in which we live.
It's, there's one person from Holland, two persons from Holland, and one from Belgium on here too.
Yes, ma'am, Marceline.
Yeah.
Alan has a question for you. It says,
okay.
Do you watch the news? If yes, what are your feelings about increased anti-Semitism happening around the world today?
I'm sorry. Can you talk a little louder?
So what Alan mentions in the chat is, do you watch the news? If yes, what are your feelings about increased anti-Semitism happening around the world today?
Today?
Today.
Actually, today. I hope it gets better. I don't know. It's a crazy times. I keep thinking to spend my last few years in a sort of living hell for a while, but I'm still alive. I'm a survivor. I'll survive this as well, and I hope the world gets better.
We certainly all hope that the world gets better as well, and that some of this chaos reduces for sure. And I know that you'll be able to pull through, Carla.
Absolutely.
Well, that's one of the better things I learned during the war.
And now we hear from, it says, this is Tanya.
Yeah.
Your friendship enriches our lives. You're a fabulous role model.
Oh,
Mhm.
well, I really appreciate it. Tanya, she lives next door, so I see her quite often, and I see quite a few people on here that I know. Let's see, especially here, my people from Belgium. I can't pronounce it. Wow, Tutu van Furt in Holland, and Marceline van Furt in Holland, and both online. And I really appreciate that. And Jan Beekens from Belgium, that I can see. It's not easy to give this paper, but I've done it many, many times, also at the Holocaust Museum in Naples, but things get harder and harder to do. So I try what I can.
Well, we truly appreciate you sharing your story. It's vital, as I said before, going forward, remembering all of the survivor stories so that this can never be forgotten and it can never be denied. I think that's a real problem that we're facing, that we've been facing, and will continue to have to fight,
Yeah.
And I see that I have a few students and previous students that are listening. This is our task, everyone. This is our job going into the future. As these people who survived become fewer and fewer and are no longer to speak for themselves, it's our job to take up the torch and carry forward and to speak truth into the the lies of naysayers.
Yes, it is, and I hope that I can get the assistant living place or Shell Point, see the virtual museum. I'm working on that.
Oh, that'd be
So I'll talk to the guy then. And is this being filmed? Can we see it on YouTube?
Yes, ma'am. So this is being recorded and will be available on YouTube after the session today. We do have a couple other questions that came in, one from Carol. Did you eventually get to college?
No, I get my own, it says my photo up, and I just don't know. It says Zoom, but I don't.
No. She means, did you ever attend college after you came to America, or within your life, were you able to
Yes.
attend college?
Yes. Well,
On the very, very top left, underneath the word camera, there's a little arrow that points left.
Yeah.
You may want to mute your YouTube on your device.
Yeah. Okay.
There you go.
There we go.
You went to the University of Amsterdam, right, Carla?
Yes, but the first thing I did after the the first thing I did the first thing after the war I did was take a
You may have to hit mute on your YouTube again.
Yeah, here we are. Yeah. Now I hear myself talk. You as the Jews who occupied Europe, the Germans created an efficient apparatus that rounded up Jews and transported them to special extermination camps. Many of them in Poland. Their prisoners were worked. So are we?
We're still live. You may want to just close the tab within your browser for YouTube. And you had mentioned that you went to the University of Amsterdam.
Yes. But the first year, they couldn't talk me out of it. I took a secretary course where I could type in 4 languages, and and we got to do 3 languages in high school: English, German, and French. So I took this course that I could be a clerk at a court, etc. It was a long program and a good year-long program. And then my mother said it's time to go to the university. So I didn't study English, of all things. So all I need to see is Sarah.
What's that?
I say your name, that's all I say. Yes. I guess everybody's off now, right?
No,
everyone's still here.
Your cousin is on from Israel, your sister says.
Oh, I forgot. Oh, really? Oh, but and how come I can't? Bonjour les étudiants, venez avec moi en France. I see you now. What's this?
I think it's exciting to go to France because you get the opportunity to actually practice the French that you're learning.
Oh, I see.
Walk around and experience the culture. So we get to spend a lot of time in Paris, so we get to see the famous.
Yeah, if you're able to.
We've been there a number of times.
Which a lot of students might know is a sort of culinary capital of the world. We're going to experience French culture, and we're going to eat a lot of great food, and we're going to walk around, and we're going to interact.
It sounds very exciting being in France, but I think we have so many great comments that have already been shared, and we certainly appreciate you taking the time out of your day today, Carla, to come and speak with us. Your story was certainly moving. We certainly appreciate you coming to us virtually to speak with everyone.
Absolutely. It's very inspiring.
Well, thank you, everybody, if you're still on, for listening. And I will, yes, Elisheva, thank you for listening. I'm sorry I didn't get your pictures, but I will when I see it on Facebook.
Absolutely. And Jan mentions, Carla, your father received a Golden Honor Medal from Bach and Stibbe. Do you still have it?
I have some things, but I guess I don't know whether I have a medal. What you mean, from when he retired?
I'm not certain. We'll see if Jan mentions.
I don't know. That person should contact me and tell me what it is. The person who asked about that.
All right.
I am sure they will be in touch with you. Well, thank you, everyone. We're going to end the stream. Our next talk is at 2:30 today. We hope that you come back and join us here on YouTube Live for the other events that we have today. Thank you, everyone.
I see what my camera went out. That's